Russia is the third largest oil producer on the planet. For decades, that was simply a fact of the world. A country so awash in fuel, it powered its economy, its army, and half of Europe's winters on the surplus. This week, that same country did something it has not done in decades. It started importing fuel, gasoline from India, gasoline from Belarus, diesel exports, banned outright. That is not a headline about a fire at a refinery. It is a signal that something structural has broken. And once you understand what did it, and it wasn't a NATO army, you'll read this entire war differently. Because the front line has barely moved in months. The thing that's actually cracking is underneath it. This is Professor John's Intro Plus Soft CTA. Keep it low-key, honest. Before we go further, one promise. I'm not going to hand you either side's press release. Russia's numbers and Ukraine's numbers both need pressure applied to them, and I'll show you where they disagree. But here's what nobody's really disputing. Russia, the world's third biggest oil producer, is now buying fuel from abroad to keep its own gas stations running. If that sentence sounds impossible to you, good. Sit with it. This is the story of how a country with almost no navy and a fraction of Russia's resources found the one target that mass and manpower can't protect. If you want the version of this war that follows the machinery, not the map, subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel exist. Now, let's follow the fuel. Signpost note, start with the number, and be honest about the range. Start with the number because it's the spine of everything. Ukraine's General Staff says its strikes have disabled roughly 43%, 42.7% to be exact, of Russia's total oil refining capacity. Now that's Ukraine's figure, and I'll be straight with you. It's the high end. The International Energy Agency says more than 20%. Reuters estimates around 25%. The Financial Times puts the range at 20 to 40. Finland's president said 40. So the honest answer is, somewhere between a fifth and 40% of Russia's ability to refine fuel is offline. Even the low end of that is staggering. And every serious estimate agrees on the direction, down and getting worse. That's the number to hold. Not because it's precise, but because even its floor is historic. Signpost. The proof isn't the claim. It's Russia's own response. Here's how you know the damage is real, without trusting anyone's percentage. You watch what Russia does, not what anyone says. On July 8th, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak sat in a televised government meeting chaired by Vladimir Putin and announced a nationwide ban on diesel exports through the end of July. In his own words, he admitted, "The current situation at filling stations is causing concern among the public." Think about that. Russia is one of the world's great diesel exporters. Diesel is money. Banning its export is like a bakery announcing it can no longer sell bread because it can't feed its own town. You do not take a step that expensive, that publicly humiliating, unless the alternative is worse. The ban is the confession. According to Reuters, Bloomberg, and Russian officials themselves, Moscow is now buying gasoline from Belarus, a record 141,000 tons in June, more than 100 times the year before. It's importing petrol from India by sea, tens of thousands of tons already shipped. Bloomberg reports the diesel ban pushed global diesel prices to multi-year highs because Russia normally supplies around 11% of the world's diesel. The world's third biggest oil producer, importing fuel. Read that again. This is a country that sells energy to the world, now standing in line to buy it back. That is not a bad week. That is a structural failure. And it was engineered deliberately from the air. In the first half of 2026 alone, Ukrainian long-range drones struck Russian oil refineries and fuel infrastructure nearly 200 times. That's not a series of raids, that's an industrial campaign against an industry. By early July, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces reported that every one of Russia's 11 largest refineries had been hit at least once. The commander of that force, call sign Madyar, reported 10 major refineries struck in May alone, 6 forced to stop entirely. This is methodical, sustained, a machine built to take apart another machine, one processing unit at a time. And the distances involved broke every assumption Russia had about where it was safe. Which brings us to Omsk. On July 6th, Ukrainian drones struck the Omsk refinery, Russia's largest, around 12% of national capacity in a single plant. And Omsk sits more than 2,500 kilometers from Ukraine. Let that distance land. That's roughly the width of the United States. Russia built its most important refineries deep in Siberia precisely because they were assumed to be untouchable, beyond any drone's reach. Ukraine reached them anyway, using upgraded Firepoint drones with a redesigned wing that doubles as a fuel tank, giving them a range of over 3,000 kilometers. With Omsk hit, the message was total. There is no deep rear anymore. Zelensky's own line was almost casual. Siberia, he said, is now within reach. That casualness was the point. Nowhere is safe now. Now, why refineries? Why not just throw everything at the front line? Because Ukraine figured out something about this war that took the world 2 years to accept. Ukraine cannot win a contest of mass. Russia has more men, more shells, more everything at the front. So Ukraine stopped fighting the war Russia wants, the grinding meat grinder of meters and trenches, and started attacking the thing underneath the mass. The ability to sustain it. Diesel is the blood of a mechanized army. It moves the trucks, the armor, the ammunition, the supplies. Cripple the refineries, and you don't beat the army in the field. You starve it before it gets to the field. You force Russia's soldiers to compete for fuel with its farmers at harvest, with its truckers, with ordinary drivers sitting in hours-long queues. That's the strategy, not the front. The fuel behind the front. And this is no longer an abstraction on a map. It has arrived in Russian daily life. By early July, according to Reuters and Ukrainian estimates, fuel restrictions had spread to most of Russia's regions. By one count, 78 of 83, directly affecting around 50 million people, roughly a third of the population. Sales capped at 20 liters per car. Filling canisters banned. Some regions rotating who can buy fuel by license plate number, odd days and even days. Several regions declared states of emergency over fuel. Semaphore reported the worst shortages since the fall of the Soviet Union, and rare public dissent, with Putin facing genuine political pressure at home. The Kremlin is now spending billions a month, by some estimates, just to keep pump prices artificially low and prevent unrest. The war has come home, not as headlines, but as empty gas stations. So here's the turn. The thing this is really about. This is not a story about burning refineries. Fires photograph well, but they're the surface. This is the story of a strategic inversion. For most of this war, the question was whether Ukraine could hold on against Russian mass. This week reframed it entirely. The question is now whether Russia can sustain its own war machine while the machinery that fuels it is dismantled from 2,000 kilometers away. It is not the strikes that matter. It's what they reveal. A country that sells energy to the world, importing it. An army built on mass, running short of the one thing that moves mass. The front line barely moved this year, but the ground beneath the whole Russian war effort shifted. Quietly, structurally. That's the story the fires are hiding in plain sight. Now let me apply the pressure I promised, because this is where honest analysis earns its keep. Russia is not collapsing. Let's be clear about that. Back in late 2025, Reuters found that despite earlier strikes, Russia's oil processing had fallen only around 3% over the year, because refineries used spare capacity to absorb the damage. Russia is enormous. It has depth, reserves, and a brutal tolerance for hardship. Energy analyst Sergei Vakulenko notes the crisis is real, but hasn't yet caused large-scale breakdowns in goods or services. And repairs are happening. The sector has slack. Some of these plants will come back. So anyone telling you this single campaign ends the war is selling you something. It doesn't. What it does is change the cost curve. It makes every month of this war more expensive for Russia to sustain than the last. That's slower and less dramatic and far more real than collapse. But here's why this reaches far beyond Russia's gas stations. First, the world. Bloomberg reports the diesel export ban sent global diesel prices to multi-year highs, layered on top of the oil disruption from the Iran crisis in the very same week. When the world's third biggest producer stops exporting and starts importing, everyone's fuel bill feels it. Second, and bigger, this has rewritten how NATO sees Ukraine. At the Ankara summit, Finland's president said Ukraine has the cards now. Allies pledged around $80 billion in aid for 2026, and Trump signaled a green light for Ukraine to produce Patriot missiles. The reason is simple. Ukraine is no longer seen as just a recipient of charity. It has something to teach. A drone playbook that turned a fraction of Russia's budget into a strategic weapon. That shift in perception may matter more, long-term, than any single refinery. And this is where the whole war snaps into focus, if you hold two images side by side. On one side, Russia this month announced the capture of a city, Kostiantynivka, that, by multiple independent trackers, it does not actually fully hold, timed for a Western holiday weekend. A war for the space between your ears. On the other side, Ukraine quietly took 40% of Russia's refining offline and forced it to import fuel. A war on the machinery. One side is manufacturing the appearance of winning. The other is dismantling the ability to win. That contrast is the entire war right now. If this is helping you see it clearly, share it with 3 people, not 1, 3, because almost no one is connecting these 2 stories, and they are the same story. So here's the question I keep turning over. If Russia were genuinely winning the way it claims, rapidly, inevitably, it wouldn't need to import gasoline from Belarus. It wouldn't need to ban its own diesel exports and admit, on state television, that its gas stations are causing public concern. It wouldn't need to announce cities it doesn't hold. Strength doesn't need a subsidy to hide its own fuel prices from its own people. The loudest claims of victory are coming from the side quietly importing fuel. The quietest confidence is coming from the side that just proved nowhere in Russia is out of reach. The facts on the ground are always quieter than the claims about them. That's exactly why the claims have to be so loud. So come back to where we started. The world's 3rd biggest oil producer, standing in line to import fuel it used to sell to the world. A number, somewhere between 1/5 and 40% of its refining capacity, knocked offline, not by an army, but by cheap drones flying farther than anyone thought possible. The map of the front barely moved this year, but the ground underneath it is shifting. 1 refinery, 1 diesel shipment, 1 empty gas station at a time. Russia will adapt, it always does. The real question is the pace, whether it can rebuild and defend faster than Ukraine can burn and reach. And right now, the drones are flying farther every month. That's the war being fought under the headlines, not the map, the machinery. This is Professor John. I'll see you in the next one.